Imagine a world where more women had the time to fully explore their genius. Welcome to She Rebel Radio, the UK's podcast for women leaders and founders ready to unlearn conventional rules and lead their businesses of significance. We've been held for counter-status quo ideas and a whole dose of feminine perspective. This is our 8th series. My name's Lulu Minns and I host retreats and create spaces for women leaders to explore their genius. And today, I'm going to create that same space right here for you on this podcast. Welcome to episode 126 of She Rebel Radio, Writing to Launch with Vicky Weinburg. Vicky is the author of Bring Your Product to Life, which is a step-by-step guide about the difficult and confusing product creation process. Her book takes us through the process from brainstorming a product idea to finding suppliers, choosing your price, and finally launching your product. Prior to this, after many years in the corporate world, Vicky founded Tiny Chipmunk, a bamboo baby brand. This was after her second baby, as she wanted to create a product-based business in order to stop trading time for money. During the book, she charts her lessons and has created an easy-to-follow process featuring stories and tips from mostly female founders who have appeared on her podcast show of the same name, Bring Your Product to Life. We met at Thrive in 2019, I think it was. How are you doing, Vicky?
Really good, thank you, Lulu. How are you?
Yeah, I'm good, thank you. I'm good. It's really good to talk to you today.
Yeah, you too. And thank you for inviting me on. And I can't believe, so it must be coming up to 4 years since we met. And I can't quite believe that.
I know. I think She Rebel Radio was a real baby and you were talking about probably starting a podcast at the time.
I was, because I started my own podcast in March 2020. Yeah. So I think at the point we met, it was just an idea that I was playing around with. So yeah, I can't quite believe that it's been 4 years.
Yeah, I know. It's crazy, isn't it? There's definitely a before and after 2019 at the moment.
Yes, it feels like, well, I don't know, it feels like now maybe we're getting back to sort of 2019, if you know what I mean, in terms of the way we live and go about our lives. But yeah, there's definitely a big gap in the middle where things weren't quite normal for a while.
Yeah, 100%. So I'd love to start with, what was the inspiration in bringing your book to life? What was the catalyst in getting it done and launching it in 2023?
If I'm honest, I've always liked the idea of writing a book because I've always liked writing and words. And you may or may not remember that I had a blog. So at the time we met, the main thing I was mostly doing was I had a blog, which was I started that blog when I started a products business back in, I think it was 2016. And that was how I started it off, as a way of like letting people know what I was doing and also thinking other people might learn from it. And so I aim to have a blog every week about, something to do with the product creation process and what I was doing. Then I launched the podcast, as we said, in March 2020, because I was really keen to share other people's stories, because obviously the blog was my perspective and my learnings and my experiences, but everyone's, as you know, is so different, especially when it comes to starting a business. We all come at it from different angles, we have different experiences, and I really wanted to create a podcast that would inspire people who had either recently started a products business or wanted to start one. And I just thought it's really useful just to hear from as many people as possible, and ideally people who aren't much further ahead than you are as well, so people you can really relate to. So the podcast had been going for over over 2 years, because it was actually the end of 2022 when I started thinking about the book. And I was just thinking, I've got so much content. I've got the podcast, I've got the blog, and I thought, surely there must be something I can do with all of this to really help people. Because I think that I got a lot of people following me, and do get a lot of people following me, listen to podcasts who, as I said, are thinking about starting a products business or really early in the journey. And I thought, well, the podcast, I hope is, well, I'm told is really useful, and I hopefully my blog posts are as well, and everything else. But I thought, if you were starting right from the beginning, you would still, it's really hard. You probably find it yourself, Lulu, when you can get stuff from podcasts, but when you're trying to actually do something very specific, like write a book or launch a product or whatever it is, or start a podcast, you almost need someone to tell you what to do in what order. And while you can get some great advice and inspiration from a podcast or a blog post, or listening to a speaker, or all of these things, it's not quite you're still having to pull the pieces together yourself. So I thought, I wonder if I can take everything I've done and pull it all together for somebody.
Yeah, it's that implementation piece, isn't it? We were just talking about podcasting before we hit record, that we don't video it because quite often our main demographic being women, they're doing other things when they're listening to it, going for a run, maybe in the kitchen, etc. So you listen to it, you hear the advice, but do you actually implement it?
And also, let's face it, you're a busy woman. Do you have the time to figure out what episodes you need to listen to, in what order, and then go all through all the show notes and find all this, all the supplementary things? I thought, why didn't I just take all of that work out of it and just put it in a really simple format, so that people, so all of that thinking work is done. But in terms of the thinking work of working out what you have to do, of course, there's lots someone still needs to do to launch their products. But in terms of figuring out what to do in what order, which was the thing that I struggled with the most when I got started, I thought, let's do that for somebody, and just pull it all together and make it really easy to digest and follow.
What support did you need for the writing creation process? How was that different to other things you've achieved and created? You're in quite a unique position, really, with having a product business and then a service-based business.
Yeah, so it was really interesting because I felt like I've been in a position before of doing something I've never done, so creating a product, for example, and obviously creating a book is another example of something that I've never done, wasn't really sure how to do it. But the situation, I guess, was quite different. One, because I was able to get some support. So I did work with a writing coach on how to structure the book, because that was something I was completely stuck on. How do you work out what goes in and what order and things like that? And part of that was because I am also in a different position to when I started out, in that I have so much content now, which is obviously really, really good. But I was like, I've done hundreds of podcast episodes and I've written hundreds, probably a lot anyway, of blog posts. I had so much content, and I was like, I actually don't really know how to turn all of this into a book. So one was, like I say, was I didn't know the process of how to write a book. So what of all the things you need to do, do you need to get an illustrator, and how does it become words in a Word document or Google Doc to an actual book? But then it was how to take everything that I've got and write it in a way that achieved what I wanted to achieve while still being really succinct.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, so it's almost like you've got more resources when you are further along in your business, but then this huge amount of content, which can actually be overwhelming, that you got some support in terms of how to structure that. So how did the content that you've created from the podcast series, and you've also said from your blog as well, how did that support you in writing the book once you had help with the structure?
So how I've used the podcast really is, so the book, I know you've read it, Lulu, but for anyone who hasn't, so the book takes you through the product creation process step by step. In each chapter, I explain what's the actual, what you need to do, why you need to do it, how to do it. So it's very practical. And then in each chapter, I feature a story from a podcast guest who shares something that kind of brings that content to life a little bit. So a story that illustrates what I'm talking about, because I wanted to feature as many voices as possible, because mine is only one experience, and I never want to say that the way I do it is the right way or my experience is the only experience. And I've had so many amazing guests who shared so much, and that were a lot more than I do, and I just wanted to feature as many of their stories as possible. So that's really how the podcast ties in with the book. While I do solo podcast episodes, as I say, I really wanted to make sure I featured as many of my guests as possible.
Mm. And you commented in the early part of the book that, you found when you were starting a product-based business that the business advice was quite male dominated. Why did you think that there was room in the market for a step-by-step guide for product creation along with strong female narrative? Because I think the majority of the stories, maybe bar one, are women-based product businesses.
Yeah, I feel so. Again, for anyone who hasn't read the book, when I first started my business and I was looking for advice, most of what I was getting was from men. And I found it for me personally, and I'm sure a lot of us can maybe relate to this, I found it a lot harder to relate to, because as women, we often have different demands on our time. So when I started my product business, I had two small children. I had a 3-year-old and a 5 or 6 week old, like a really small baby. So I didn't have much time, for example. So I couldn't follow all of this advice about, spend all this time doing this and time doing that. Everything for me needed to work in small chunks. Also, I wasn't coming from the same position. So a lot of the people that I was reading and following to try and find out what to do were in a position where they already had a successful company, and this was something they were doing on the side, and they had money to invest, and it just wasn't relatable to me at that time, and still isn't now, if I'm honest. And then when I launched a podcast, and as you say, most of my guests have been women, because I'm really keen to speak to women, because I feel like we can, I've had some great men feature on the podcast as well, but the goal of the podcast right from the start was to be relatable. And a lot of my guests are women. A lot of them are mums. They don't have to be, but a lot just happen to be. And I just think it's really interesting, and it's really just inspiring to hear from people who are maybe in a similar situation to you, who are saying, yes, I started this on my table around my day job or around my kids or whatever it is. I just really keen to share that, and to share some of the challenges as well as the good things. That's the other thing I found when I was, like I said, I was reading lots of advice from men when I started. There didn't seem to be much acknowledgement of, that the process can be hard, and it can take time, and it can cost money, and there will be things that you'll struggle with. I don't know, none of that just seemed to be out there. And so I just really wanted something that other women could relate to, because that's what I wanted at the time. I couldn't find any other women doing what I was doing, and they would have been out there, by the way. It's just that maybe their voices weren't being shared, because they absolutely would have been there. And so I just wanted to create a book that I felt would be relatable to someone like me. I mean, this is basically the book that I would have wanted 7 years ago, or however long ago it was.
Yeah, and that's critical, I think, when you're creating things, of creating something that you would, want to read or listen to, as with the podcast. And I think what's really powerful, you said there, is A, being a mum and needing it in tiny chunks, but B, that even then, I don't have children. I find a lot of the male dominated business books not very relatable, because also, they're starting often at a point, as you say, of already having a successful business, already having a stack of cash to invest in XYZ, and educating us in inverted commas from that point, rather than actually a relatable point of maybe starting it on your kitchen table alongside another job or children or whatever it may be. So that's a really powerful starting point for you. Now, as we've said, your book features many stories from female founders who are mums, and otherwise, but what is one of your favorite stories and product launches?
I really struggled with this question, because obviously I want to say all of them. The bit I struggled most with the book actually was selecting which stories to go in, because I could have found a place for every, I actually think I might need to do another book at some point, because I've got so many stories.
Yeah, I was going to say, is that coming?
To share.
Part 2.
But one I'm going to share one, because I want to share one. One of the stories that I love was a lady called Laura, who has a company called Footlit, and she sells rucksacks that light up.
Mm-hmm.
And the reason that I really like Laura's story is because it ties on to something I know we're going to speak about later, is that she did so much research into getting her product the best it could be. So her rucksack is aimed for children who are maybe walking home by themselves from school and it's dark and they need to be visible. And she just did so much research. She knew exactly who her bag was for. So she spent so much time talking to the kids about how they would use a school bag and what it needed to have and do and look like. But then she also spoke to parents, which is really smart and something that can be missed, because she also recognised that parents are the ones that are going to be spending the money, and so they also had to be on side and also think it was a good idea and worth them buying. And so she just did so much in-depth research that I was so in awe of, because that's something that I always recommend, and it's a big part of the book, as you will have read, but not everybody spends that amount of time doing it. And I think she has a fantastic product, because of all that attention to detail, and because she didn't go out and say, okay, this is what my daughter needs, I'm going to create the product that she needs. She actually took the time to speak to other people as well, because I think it can be so easy to create something that meets your exact need without thinking, okay, this needs to be commercially viable and other people need need to want to buy it as well.
Yeah,
So
and
yeah.
the market research in terms of, the people that are actually going to purchase it and the user of the product, i.e. the children as well, it's got to be a mutual thing, is really powerful. Now, you mentioned in the book a number of times not to skip parts of the process. So on that note, what's your favorite part of the product creation process, and what parts did you or do others tend to find most daunting?
Yeah, it's coming back, and this is why I wanted to share Laura's story. I think the thing that lots of people do miss is some of the research at the beginning, and it's also my favourite part. So I don't want to. It sounds really like I'm saying the same answer for everything, but I promise this is true. I really enjoyed when I was launching my products. I really enjoyed doing market research. I really enjoyed speaking to people and finding out what they wanted, what they needed, what they thought of existing products. I loved spending time online, looking at other, existing things and reading the reviews and seeing what people thought and thinking, okay, how could I improve this? I just love that process of getting all the information and then using it to make my products the best I possibly could. But that is something that not everyone wants to do, because I think part of it is, and I can see it, is that when you've got an idea for a product, it's so exciting, especially if you think, oh, this is a really good idea, or it meets a certain need, or you get really excited about it, as you should. And I think it can be so easy to go ahead and just get on with, all the fun stuff, designing it, sourcing it, finding out how much it's going to cost, without doing the work beforehand to say, okay, is this viable? Will other people buy it? What do other people want from it? I think it can be really easy to create a product that you love, but just might, commercially might not work, because it might be so specific to you and your needs, if that makes sense.
Yeah.
So this isn't a criticism at all. I can totally see that anyone who, people don't skip this step for any other reason, I think, than pure enthusiasm. But I want everyone who goes through the process to be successful. And I think spending a little bit of extra time up front on what can be quite boring and tedious if you don't enjoy it, I just think can really pay off in the long run. And I think it's well worth it. And that's something that comes across so much when I speak to guests, is that the work spent at the outset, sometimes people spend months or even in some cases years getting their product off the ground, but they're always, it's always worth it. And so
What's really key there is, as you're saying, is attention to detail and doing your research, and not just running away with the fun stuff, as you said there.
Yeah, because I think it can be really easy to gravitate to the things that you enjoy and the things you want to do. So I possibly might have been, I possibly might have spent a little bit too long on that stage of things, because I really enjoyed it. And I found one thing that I found challenging, and actually something that other people find challenging, is actually looking for people to manufacture their products. If you're not making your product yourself, and if you are looking for someone to manufacture it, I found that quite challenging. I know lots of other people do. And I think personally, if I look back, I probably put off doing that as long as I possibly could, because I was a little bit daunted, because I felt so out of my depth. And I wanted to move on to the fun stuff. Like, I've got a copywriting background, so I was really excited about writing product descriptions, because that's something I knew I could do well. And I think we all sort of try and lean into our strengths. So yeah, so it is tricky, because if you're going to create a product, there are going to be bits that play to your strengths and bits you enjoy, and there'll be things that you don't enjoy and don't play to your strengths. And I guess that you just need to remember that all of the pieces are equal, and to
Yes.
get the best possible outcome is just, it's really important to spend time on every step of the process.
So there's lots of different skills that someone will need to launch a product, like running any business. If you're bootstrapping a little bit, doing it from a kitchen table, there's going to be a number of things that you have to involve yourself in. What is your advice for those, to diving into the parts of the process that maybe they're not loving?
I guess knowing that it's just a part, and it's, so it's just a part. So, like, this too shall end, if you know what I mean. You have to get through this part to move on to the next part, because I do believe that, as you'll see in the book, that it's a step-by-step process, and if you can work through the pieces in order. So I do think there's an element of knowing that, okay, you can do this thing that you're not that keen on, but then you're going to move on to the next step, and maybe that's something you will enjoy more. I also would say, if you are in a position, and I know not everybody is, but if you're in a position where you can outsource some of the bits that you don't enjoy or you feel aren't your strengths, then do it. You don't have to do everything yourself. I know that I absolutely know that's not an option for everyone. It wasn't an option for me when I started out. I had to do everything myself. But if you can get some help, and even if it's not paid help, even if it's I don't know, even if it is buying a book or listening to podcasts or going to network events or talking to somebody who's been there before and just asking for some advice, I would say you definitely don't have to go it alone. So if you are struggling, just see if you can get some help. And I think if you're not enjoying it, I just think remember the big picture, which is, at the end of this, you're going to have a product that you're going to be super, super proud of, and you're going to be able to sell, and it's going to make you money, and is going to help other people, hopefully, and make other people happy. And yeah, there's nothing quite like having people buy and use and love something that you've created. So I think you just need to hold on to that as well.
And do you come across, and I find this sometimes with business owners, with a new idea in a more service-based profession, that there can be a reluctance to go out there and do the research because they're thinking that someone might steal their idea. But you and I know the reality of how difficult it is to get anything out there. Is that a resistance that you could come across?
Absolutely. And it's one I had myself as well. I remember when I first launched my first product, I found it really, I don't know why, I found it really hard to talk about, because I just thought, if I tell somebody, they might just go and do it. And of course they weren't going to, because let's face it, it's hard, but also you have to be passionate about something to see it through, especially for a startup, for a product business. I don't think people are in the business of doing that, starting up a product, and unless it's something that actually means something to them and they want to do. I never hear someone talk about a product idea and think, oh, I'll go away and do that, because if it's something that genuinely interested me, I'd probably be doing it already. I don't think that's the case, and I can totally see the reluctance, and I think that's also a reason people don't always do as much research as they could, because they're scared that if they tell people, oh, I'm thinking about launching this or creating that someone else might take their idea and run with it. And what I'd say is, if I haven't convinced anyone that people aren't going to steal your idea, that's not a reason not to do the research. You can do plenty of research about telling people this is what you're going to do. You can ask questions without giving too much away. So don't let that be a reason not to talk about your product and your idea and get some feedback.
Yeah, 100%. Now, you self-published your book via Amazon. You are a bit of an Amazon queen, but what was the most challenging part about that process?
To be honest, because I'm so familiar with Amazon, and because Amazon is tricky, I found the actual using the interface and stuff fine, because that's something that I'm used to and I've done before. So for me, it was I don't even know how to say, the more technical aspect. So I worked with a typesetter to get the book from a Google Doc into a book. So you have to upload a bit. I can't even remember what the type of file is called that you have to upload into it. It might have even just been a PDF, but I found that bit the trickiest sort of, and I'm glad I had someone that I was working with to help me. So you upload the book and then you can see how it's going to look when it's printed. And that's when you can see, oh, actually, that's going to get cut off by the margins, or this page number isn't going to be there. And that's the bit where I feel that I'm so glad that I invested in someone to help me with that, because if I was on my own, I don't think I could have done it. That just doesn't pay to my strengths. Paying really, really meticulous attention to detail on something that's very technical, and yeah, there was a lot of moving things by a couple of millimeters and things like that, that luckily I had someone to do for me, because I found that really hard. And I will say that for anyone thinking about self-publishing via Amazon, I don't think it's particularly complicated. But yeah, I would say that the actual book is very important. Having a properly formatted book is very important. You've probably seen or especially on Kindle before, you've probably seen books, you've downloaded something and it just looks, I don't know, like a block of text.
I haven't got a Kindle actually, but I did read one of the books for this series on my phone for the first time ever. So I feel like I'm almost ready for a Kindle in my life, because I've got too many books and not anywhere to put them. So it's coming for me. Now, what has been one of your favourite business books and why?
Okay, so the book, one of my favourite business books, and it's very niche, is called Dare to Write, and it's by Steph Caswell. And it's basically a book about how to write a book. And I like this book for two reasons. One, because as you probably gathered from this whole conversation, is I like to know how to do things before I jump in and do them. And I did the same at the beginning of creating my own product. I went out to look for how am I going to do this and what steps are involved, but there wasn't a book to tell me how to do this, which is why I wrote one. But this book, Dare to Write, is that book for writing a book. So it basically takes you through, you do this, and this, you do all these things, and then you have a book at the end. Obviously, we know there's a lot more involved than that, but I really like that. And also, I found this same book really good inspiration for writing my book, because it was the first book that I'd come across that was kind of what I had in my head. I hadn't read a book before that was like the book that I wanted to write until I picked up this one, and that really helped me, because as I said, the thing that I struggled with the most with this was how to structure the book. So this book helped me in both of those ways.
And it's also a business book written by another woman, where there's not that many of them.
Yes, that's absolutely true. And a woman, and Steph has a very similar story to me, in that she wrote a book, wasn't sure how to write a book, and then wrote a book about how to write a book. So I really like that aspect of it as well. Like, someone's written a book from their own lived experience. I really like that. And she obviously had to learn how to do it, and she learned how to do it, and now she's sharing it with other people. And I just think, that's really good as well.
Amazing. What is next for you, Vicky, and where can we find you?
I don't know what's next for me, and I feel like maybe I should know that, but I don't. I like the idea of another book at some point. As I said, I've got so much content from all of the wonderful women that I spoke to over the past almost 4 years. So I think there's definitely something that can be done with that, but watch this space. And the best place to find me is vickyweinburg.com. Or you can search Bring Your Product Idea to Life, which will show you my book and the podcast.
Yeah, and I highly recommend the book to any of our listeners who are thinking about a product-based business. It's super easy and well structured to read. It can be read in a weekend quite easily, can't it?
Oh, absolutely. It's not a big book. In fact, when I first saw it as a printed book, I was actually like, oh, this is much smaller than I thought it was going to be.
You're like, how much work have I put into this?
But that is because anyone who knows me will know I like to keep things concise and simple. So I've basically tried to make it so that you don't need to spend 6 months reading it and another couple thinking about, what do I do next? I've tried to make it as clear and as simple as possible, because I know that the people who read my book are going to be busy and they just want to get on with things. They don't want to spend hours listening to me waffle.
Yeah, so that bite-sized chunks, isn't it? I think it's a great book to read through once, and then you can go back to each bit as you're moving along the process.
That's exactly how I recommend people use it. Yeah, you can read through it in an afternoon. You probably can read through it in an afternoon, and then you just go through each chapter, and it's only going to take 5-10 minutes to read each chapter, see what you need to do, and then you can get on with it. Well, I know it's not as simple as I've just said it, but hopefully it's as simple as it can be.
Amazing. Thanks so much for being on She Rebel Radio, Vicky.
Oh, thank you so much for inviting me and for speaking to me. Thank you so much.
Thank you for listening to She Rebel Radio. If this episode has inspired you, please pass it on and share with at least one other incredible woman. Don't forget to also hit subscribe and leave us a review. You can find out more about me and my work at lulumins.com or on most social media platforms.